So we started getting like angry letters about it. Not a regular thing, but certainly enough to kind of really pay attention to the extent that I then had to change the trick and put in, don't take part in this. Close your eyes now if you suffer from any form of PTSD. So there we were with a card trick that was causing proper distress to some people. Not just being angry, but like, people in, shaking, in tears, sobbing, just in really weird situations that kind of like came out of it. So that was fascinating, because I've often had moments like that when I've toured.
Ladies and gentlemen, the incredible Dr. Brown! Derren Brown, everybody!
And our beliefs and our understandings about the world are limited by that perspective, which means we tell ourselves stories.
It stayed with me, this, because I think theatrically it was interesting, because as you say, I'm saying this, I'm making this up, this is rubbish. So I've got your aunt here, her name is Jan, is that right? Auntie Jan? And they'd be like, yes. And she's not saying anything, of course, I'm lying to you, but she's saying blah, blah, blah. And it would go back and forth like that. And it just kind of occupied this space. I think we get rather caught up, particularly as mentalists, between, are you saying it's real or it's not? Are you this or this? Like, it's a very binary thing. And I don't think ultimately your responsibility is to that particular ethical question. I think your responsibility is a theatrical one. And actually, really early on in the tour, I came out at the stage door and there was a girl there. She said, I wonder if you could put me in touch with my grandmother who's passed away. I said, oh God. I said, I'm so sorry. I really hoped it's clear from the show that I can't really do any of that stuff. And she went, oh yeah, no, I know you can't do any of that stuff, but I just wondered if you could put me in touch with her. Which was such an interesting thing for someone to say.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Desert Island Tricks. We are really in for a treat today. It's somebody that, again, you guys have seen the title at this point. And you'll notice that this is the first videoed one that we have done. We may do more video ones in the future. But today's guest is... I really can't introduce him. So all I can tell you is my thoughts about this person, because I think that's just the nicest way to go. So this particular person that we have on today was someone who's actually from my home area. So when I was 11 and 12, and I come from Croydon originally, don't judge me everyone. So I'm from Croydon originally. I remember being in it must have been year 7, year 8, and seeing all of the bus stops with this guy who's going to do this Russian roulette thing. And I remember very young watching this Russian roulette thing live and being absolutely on the edge of my seat. Probably shouldn't have been watching it that young, let's all be honest, but I'm glad that I did, because from that day forward, I was a huge fan of today's guest. So much so, I think I've seen pretty much all of the live shows. I've tried to collect as much. Obviously, growing up seeing his international lecture, which was just superb. And yeah, I think that my story is probably very similar to lots of people listening to this podcast and watching this podcast. I think the impact that he's had on our industry and on a lot of people as individuals is probably more profound than he would like to think. So with that being said, that's my introduction, but today's guest is the wonderful Mr. Derren Brown. Lovely to have you, Derren.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. I really like how you said that you come from Croydon originally. Everyone puts the originally on the end of Croydon, like they want to distance themselves from it. I don't live there anymore. I'm not, but I was there for a moment in my youth. It has blossomed into non-entity since I was last there. But I'm really fond of Croydon and Purley, where I actually kind of was, actually living just on the outskirts.
Well, I'm really interested to see what you're going to say, as I'm sure most listeners here, because obviously your roots coming into our industry wasn't necessarily mentalism per se. You were at one point known for your card magic, in particular Smoke, which was just fantastic. But you sort of then went on to some more of the mentalism and the hypnosis, and that's what you sort of become known for. So I'm not sure. I think there's going to be some card stuff on there.
There is actually. This is a really interesting thing to think about. First of all, because I mean, the brief I had, that these are tricks for the desert island. I mean, I understand if it's records to listen to, records. I'm an old man. Music to listen to, but I did think how. I mean, you must have had this conversation with a number of your guests, but how? Who am I performing? This is I'm on a desert island. I'm just presumably just doing these for myself, and there's no one actually experiencing any magic. Although that hasn't stopped me in the past, I have to say. That's probably fairly standard. And then I read further down the brief, and it said, no, these are tricks that you. It's not so much about performing them on the island. It's that you can only perform these tricks for the rest of your career, and that made more sense. Then that was actually really a really interesting thing to ponder. And then you made me feel really bad just before we started talking, because you said that Preston Nyman, who's one of the best people in the world, had chosen some tenure tricks. A, of course, that's genius and brilliant as he is. And B, of course, I thought, oh, right, you're not really supposed to choose your own tricks. But how much, more generous and how much nicer to not choose your own tricks. I've chosen all my own tricks apart from one, because I took that to mean you can only perform from your repertoire for the rest of your life. So yeah, forgive me upfront. Apart from one, these are all from my own repertoire. But I'm not very. It's been a long time since I kind of know what's come out, or what is sort of current in the magic scene. So it's perhaps no surprise that most of the things I remember are involve producing records and tips and old tricks. So yeah, I'm kind of a bit out of, and also so much mentalism has just turned to electronics and stuff, which is, I'm sure, lots of fun if you're doing occasional close-up gigs. But if you're touring a live show, you can't be doing any of that stuff. So I am a bit out of sync with what's in at the moment. So yeah, it's all my own stuff. Sorry.
Well, that's even more interesting though, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners will know a lot of your items. So we can play a new game that normally we can't play, which is, at this point, what do you think from Derren's material? If you're listening to this, which you are, because that's what this is, what tricks do you think Derren would put in there? I definitely think, give no confirmations here, I think Smoke has to be in there, because I think it created such a massive buzz when it came about. And one of our episodes, we had one of our guests has a version of Smoke that he released as an effect, and he would take that on his desert island with him. So it's still relevant.
Well, I can tell you some Smoke is not on the list because I was thinking very practically about this and who smokes nowadays. And when I did that trick for Andrew O'Connor and Michael Vine, who ran Objective and signed me up for the first TV show, and then they ended up giving me the gig. I did that trick in Joe Allen's in a restaurant in London, and just sort of lit up at the table and weren't even sat in the smoking section. And that feels just such an age ago that although I did think about having it on the list once I understood the brief correctly, and then I thought, well, no, I'd never be able to do it. So it'd be a waste if I don't do 8 tricks the rest of my career. Having one that relies on smoking would be a bad move. So no, I'm afraid it isn't on the list, but it nearly was.
Oh, without all of the people at home playing Derren Bingo, you've just got that one wrong, along with me.
They assumed.
So with that being said, if this is the first time that you are listening to this, today we are going to whisk Derren away
to... the last.
And the last, potentially. We're going to whisk Derren away to his own desert island. When he's there, he's allowed to take 8 tricks with him, 1 book,
I got
and
my own island, like David Copperfield.
your whole island.
I hope you won't mind me saying this, but I knew somebody who went to David's island and said that they were sort of in the car with him doing a little bit of that sort of journey, I guess, from the plainlands to David's house. And said it was really interesting because basically he was on the phone having to deal with all the difficult practical stuff that comes up because something's flooded and the electrics are gone. And it was a real lesson in no matter how stratospheric you are and you can have your own island, ultimately we're all dealing with the sort of the ordinary, boring, annoying daily stuff. I found that a very comforting tale. Anyway, sorry, back to your private island.
So, when Derren's there, he can take 8 tricks, 1 book, 1 non-magic item that he uses for magic. Particulars: who's there, how big is it, what's there, are there animals there, are there people there? All of that is in Derren's own imagination. We do not mind. The most important thing is these are the collection of tricks that Derren could not live without if that's all he could perform for forever. So with that being said, let's hop on your rubber dinghy and go to your desert island. So what did you put in your first position?
Well, it was going to be Copperfield's plane vanish, and I'll tell you why, because you probably haven't had that. I just figured, again, this is before I kind of read the entire email and just thought, hang on, I've got to think again. I need to get off this island. So, okay, make the plane vanish, great. But I can only presume that if they'd have brought the plane to the island for the trick, they're going to fly home in the plane as well. So I figured it wouldn't be too hard to get on that plane and leave the island. So that was going to be my first choice. Then I realized that wasn't the point. It wasn't like a puzzle room to escape the island. I did a puzzle room not that long ago in London, and it just so happened we got divided up into teams, and everybody in my team was gay, which just sort of happened like that. And we realized this halfway through, and then the joke was that we didn't escape, but we did. We decorate the place very nicely. There was a quiche in the oven. That was true. But the second choice then, after I disregarded that, this is the one that isn't my trick. And it's a card at any number. And the reason why I've chosen this one, it's not so much that I don't quite understand the sort of the Holy Grail aspect of it. Not really. And I haven't really performed it that much. But when I stopped doing when I stopped doing card magic after I released Devil's Picture Book, which is a DVD that's out there somewhere, and no longer a DVD, I'm just going to show my age, a streaming thing, not streaming, doesn't matter, download. I kind of, that was sort of it. I didn't really do any card stuff, and I just haven't for years. And then and this was actually going to be my book choice. I got hold of David Berglass's The Berglass Effects book, which is about a card at any number. And it was the only magic book I'd read in a long time. It's the only one I really have read in a long time and since. What I love about it, and the reason that it was my only connection with card magic over the years, really, since stopping, is that it is all about the participant or the spectator. Everywhere. I don't like the word spectator because it suggests they're a kind of passive. They're just watching something happening and sort of observing, which is sadly so much of what passes as magic. But they are. From the get-go, it's about their choices and their thoughts and their decisions and so on. And so much of card magic, like 98% of it, might involve you picking a card, but then you're very quickly into just watching the magician do stuff. I take this and look, I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to give them a shuffle, whatever. And for me, because I've sort of lost a bit of contact with card magic and I've sort of fallen out of love with it a bit. But a lot of magicians show me tricks. It really struck me how it immediately loses me I'm probably more sensitive to it than most people who maybe aren't that interested in card magic. I don't really think about it, but it immediately loses me. Whereas a trick that begins with asking me to think about something, asking me to make a decision on what my favorite card is or whatever, immediately just feels more interesting to me. I feel sort of, engaged. So, and it also appeals to me because, like, I think a lot of the best magic, you might have to improvise your way through it, and you've got a kind of a framework, and then you can sort of kind of play and take it to other places. So I, for a while, I did it just sort of, privately, I suppose. And I didn't do it enough to really, for ever to properly feel ingrained, and I forgot the memory system, and which is ironic, isn't it? So I kind of left it. But for the short amount of time that I was doing it, it really felt like a really wondrous thing. And I remember sitting with a guy I was on tour with, and we sat at the bar, and he said, "I've never asked you to show me a trick. Will you show me a trick?" So I got out the deck of cards, and just did it. And it sort of, it was at a bit of a golden sweet spot. He just kept naming a card and then kept cutting to it. Or it felt like again and again I could just do this sort of impossible thing. And it was lovely. And I know it left him with a really strong impression because I've spoken with him since. So yeah, so that's my first choice. I think it's unusual, and it's not particularly that that the effect is particularly marvelous. I don't think. I think there's just something about from the get-go, it occupies a different space than most card magic. Now, having said about the effect, when I did magic in Bristol many years ago, one of my first restaurant jobs was at a restaurant called the Glass Boat, which isn't there anymore, and it was like a floating restaurant on the water. And I would do magic around the tables, and I approached a table, and I remember there were sort of a couple of guys there, like maybe they're having a meeting. And I said, "Oh, hello, I'm Derren. I'm a kind of magician," which was always my way in. Can I show you something? And the guy said, and I had a deck of cards in my hand, and the guy said, "Oh, actually, if you don't mind, no, sorry, we're just in the middle of a meeting." And I went, "Oh, that's okay, no problem." And as I went to walk away, he said, "But Queen of Hearts, 13 cards down from the top." And he sort of said it in a jokey kind of way. So I sort of laughed, and that was the end of it. But of course, when I went round the corner, I thought, I presume he was just joking and being funny, but I will just check. And the Queen of Hearts was 13 cards down from the top. That really stayed with me. So, I mean, that's just one of those beautiful moments that I never asked him about it. I think by the time I had a chance to, he'd have gone, or I didn't want to, or something. But that certainly stayed with me. So I think under the right circumstances, it can be a pretty devastating effect.
So the version that you looked into, is it from Burglass's book?
I presume so. I presume that's the kind of the original version. I mean, yeah, I don't really know my way around any of the myriad of more modern versions, but they all seem to compromise somewhere that, a card is picked, or there's some kind of something that just puts the compromise in a very visible space, which I think is a shame. It's not really where you want it. The love of Burglass's effect is that you've got the number and you've got the card, and then you find your way after that. And you have to work with two random variables and a certain amount of chicanery that is helping you, but you have to really think on your feet, and that's lovely. It'd be a shame if it was sort of mechanical. That would take all the joy out of it.
Do you think it's still one of those effects as well that lends itself to close up in a intimate situation rather than on stage, or do you still think that there's a place for it on stage?
Oh, it's a good question. I can't really imagine it working very well on stage. David Burglass was a master at taking small close-up effects and making them work very well on stage, and finding giant versions of that. I never saw him do, if he had a stage version of Card at Any Number, which I presume he did. I didn't ever see it, so I'm sure he'd have found a way of making that really work. I think because, in my gut, because it's the sort of trick at its best that you don't necessarily know where you're going to, well, you kind of know where you're going to end up, but you don't know how you're going to get there. That's a safer thing in an intimate setting. I think on stage, matters of pace and structure and so on are a little more pressing. So I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it on stage at all. But I'm sure David had some great solutions to that. I'm going to blow my nose now. Excuse me.
Great, really, really interesting first choice as well. It's not one that I would have thought of immediately either, but it's a great one. And again, lots of people are going to have that book, so hopefully it will reignite their passion to go check back through that book, find one of those routines, and work on it.
All the fun of it is in the nuances and the just brilliant ways of getting around certain problems. And I think you need to have lived and breathed it for a long time, as David did, to have found those. So yeah, it's a terrific book.
So that brings us straight onto your second trick. So I'm guessing we're going to go for one of your own now.
I'm afraid so. I don't say any of this because I think these are better than other people's tricks at all. Far from it. But they're just tricks that I'd sort of worked for a long time when I used to do close up. Some of these are taken from my stage stuff. And this trick I included in Notes from a Fellow Traveller, which is the book that I've got out at the moment for magicians. And although it's really about performing and about, I think how to just make your magic more impactful, I did want to include some tricks in it. So I put this in it because it was one of my favorite close-up things that I did. And it was almost over before it started as an effect. It's called, by the way, it's called Watch to Sock, in that it needed a name. But that doesn't quite perhaps sell it. But what I'd approach someone at a table, I'd introduce myself. Oh, hi, I have something for you. Would you mind standing up? And I'd stand them up and I'd lift my trouser leg so that the bottom of the trouser came up, and they'd see there was a lump in my sock. And I said, have you any idea what that is? It is for you. They know, and I said, go on, reach in and take it out. So they'd sort of bend over and reach into my sock, and it'd be their watch. And because I hadn't spoken to them before or anything, it was just a really, hopefully, really surreal, odd, quick thing. And if it worked well, I normally wouldn't do anything else at that table. I'd just leave it at that. And I was really fond of it. And it sort of came from watching Carl Cloutier. He had a gimmick that he used for getting a card into his sock, which was essentially a kind of silk sheath. It was like a tube that would go from his pocket. He had like a false pocket in his trousers that would just be a bottomless thing that would go down into the sock. And with a bit of adjustment, and I found a way of making a similar thing for a watch, which is kind of easier in a way because it's a heavier object. So as long as you can steal a watch while you're standing somebody up, and then, so I've got something for you and at a couple of pockets, you can drop this thing in. Yeah, I loved all the tricks I did going around these the restaurants I worked in. Again, this is in Bristol, really more than anywhere, many years ago. Were all things that I kind of dreamt up. I didn't have anything else to do, so I'd spend my days walking around, thinking up ideas, and then going out and trying them in the evening. And I remember I was very much into stealing watches, and I remember one lady. I remember me saying to her, I'd stolen the watch and I had it in my sock, and I was just trying different ways with the trick. So I said, "Oh no, I didn't have it in my sock. I had it in my pocket. That's right. This was before I had the tube." And I said, "Do you have the time?" Or some not very imaginative way into making her realize I'd stolen her watch. So she went to look at her watch, saw the bare wrist. I said, "Oh no, don't have my watch with me. It's at home." Which I thought was an interesting starting point for a trick, because I had a watch in my pocket. So I said, "Oh, okay. Whereabouts is it?" She said, "Oh, it's on my dressing table." Obviously, she just misremembered. Presumed she hadn't put it on. I don't wear it very often. So I got her to describe it to me, and And then I sort of held my hands out, put my hands together like this, and said, put your hands over mine and describe it as vividly as you can so you can really see the thing. And then, of course, I made it appear in my hands and then said, no, can you see it? Asked everyone else at the table if they could see it. I said, great, I'll take it. And when you go home, you'll find it isn't on your dressing table and so on. So that was fun as well. So I pickpocketing, watch stealing, all of that was definitely part of the repertoire. But yeah, watch to sock is my second selection.
Great, really interesting one. Now, the thing with stealing watches is the revelation of the watch at the end. Now, if you are a pickpocket magician, then that revelation, absolutely fine. It's perfect. It's part of your persona. But was that born from the frustration of not having a way to reveal that watch afterwards?
I think it came out of just the joy of seeing Carl Cloutier's trick. I think it was that, and it just seemed like a watch. It's fun when if you can take two ideas and then combine them into one. And what I loved about it was the grammar of it, that the trick was over before it had started. Because also, the person's being stood up. You need that distraction to steal the watch, but also there's no, they're really not. There's no sense that anything has started. So I think it was just the joy of that. But yes, you're right. The sort of the trouble with a lot of pickpocketing is the reveal and how you make it more interesting. Apollo Robbins has got some really lovely thoughts on that. It reminds me actually of a running gag on Showman, which was the last stage show that I did. So the guys backstage at the time, I think it was Alex Hansford, a chap called Tom Barford who came in later, and Andy Frost and Bradley Hodgins, who you may know at least three of those, if not all four, as amazing magicians. But a running gag, which just became hilarious, was to just hold up a random object behind someone's shoulder was in the middle of a conversation. So I'd be talking to Brad, and Andy would just be next to Brad, and then whilst talking to Brad, I'd just see Andy just hold up a wallet or just his own, just some random thing off the table. But that kind of became funny, particularly funny when you're on stage trying to do a show and it's happening in the wings as they try and make you laugh. That was funnier in real life than it was as a story.
Well, I was going to say, what was the funniest thing that they managed to hold up that made you laugh?
Okay, well, the honest answer to this. So many years ago in Enigma, I think it was Enigma, or maybe even Ring of Wonders, I forget, they're all the same. There was a trick that involved a deck of cards and a die, I'm so sorry, and something else, I can't remember what, but rolled up in silver foil, and then I kind of got my hands over it. I'm reading the number on the number on the die or whatever it is. Anyway, I would have a little bit in that where I would have to put myself into a sort of a state in order to do it. And I would use the moment to have a little vocal warm-up, which is quite a handy thing to do in a show. And also it involves making weird noises. So then the audience would laugh, and then I would laugh, and I'd have like a little corpsing moment where I couldn't carry on for a moment because I was laughing because they were laughing, sort of thing. But of course, after you do that a few nights, and it's sort of it isn't really necessarily that funny to do. So I said to the guys, "Oh, feel free if you want to make me laugh in the wings. This would be a really good point to do it because I've got a really clear view into the wings. I've got three people on stage looking at me, but they're not. I'm looking past them into the wings. So feel free." So I remember Ian Sharkey was on that show, and he really went to great lengths. He was wearing my clothes one night that I left him in the dressing room with a sign saying I'm not wearing any pants. He was just in my pants another night. He was the spirit of theatre one night as well, with a sun and moon that he cut out and was dancing around. Anyway, none of this actually was funny. Like in the moment, it was just like, oh, okay, he's doing that. But it like wasn't actually, whatever weird head state you're in doing a show, it wasn't actually that funny. And then one night, my now ex-partner, Mark, came to see the show. And they said, if you want to try and make Derren laugh at this moment, do. Mark, he dropped his trousers and pants, and squatted in the wings. So I'm in the middle of this trick, and I look and I see this sort of pink shape. I'm like, oh Jesus! And also, I'm very aware that he won't have any real sense of what can be seen, like from, because you're very aware, like when you're in the wings as a professional, that the people at the far end of the first row will be able to see you. But there I am, looking at my then partner, squatting unpleasantly, knowing that he can be seen by, and then he saw. So I did start laughing for the first time. He started laughing, and then very quickly tried to get up and hide. But unfortunately, he had his trousers and pants around his ankle, so he sort of fell and rolled towards the stage and became even more visible. I don't know who saw him. I just carried on with the show and hoped no one else would notice. And then I thought, what is people's experience of, what are they thinking? What are the rest of the crew thinking? Oh, he has them waiting in the wings. Anyway, so yeah, that was that. Probably shouldn't have told that story. It's not very pleasant.
I don't even know where to go from this point. So let's just go straight on to number 3. So what was in your third position?
Straight from number 2. So this is also in Notes from a Fellow Traveller. I wanted to put my sort of the few things that have sort of lingered from my sort of close-up days. It's so weird how you kind of lose a sort of muscle for it, really. So this became, so I'm sure, like a lot of magicians and mentalists, there's a sort of a holy grail as to what you can do if people stop you in the street and ask you to do something. And bizarrely, it doesn't really ever happen. It used to happen a lot to me. It doesn't really so much now, but certainly for a long time, I thought I need an answer to this question. And I knew I didn't want to carry any props around with me. So that just kind of made it more of a creative challenge as to what the propless version of it would be. However, I did have one prop that had just become part of my everyday stuff, and that was one of those ring flight cases, if you remember those. So I guess this trick has gone through different iterations since, but the first version of that was a like a reel in a key case. So I just used to have it in my key case, and then years later I stopped doing close up, but I just still had this thing on me, so it didn't feel like a prop. And I so I thought, well, I could. There's that, like that's a prop that I got on me, but I know vanishing somebody's ring, it would be a very weird thing for me to do that. It's not really kind of part of my world. So one of the things I talk about in this book is ways of doing close-up in particular, or types of tricks where you can extricate yourself from the climax of the trick. In other words, that I think part of the reason why magicians and mentalists often seem smug is that we often don't know what to do with the moment when the trick hits and the person goes, "Wow, that's amazing," and you're like, like, what do you do with that moment? So for someone a bit introverted like me, like the best solution is, well, just don't, make sure you're not there for that moment, and just let it be an entirely personal, private experience for the person. So I started looking at how would you do this, and I remember I was in Morocco smoking one of, I think, the 3 cigars that I've had in my life. It's horrible. With Fergus Flanagan, I'm sure you know, and we were talking about this sort of problem. Anyway, so the solution was, or once it was a couple of things we came up with that night, and one of them was this. Well, I don't know exactly. I think I call it. What do I call it? A trick with a key. What do I call it? I'm actually looking at the contents of the book, but it's a really big book, as I can't find it. Anyway, a trick with a key, I think I call it. So what else could you do? What would be a mentalism trick using that prop? So the scenario would be somebody stopping in the street and saying, "Can you show me a trick?" I guess they wouldn't stop in the trick less than you, but if getting into it like an impromptu situation. And I've only done this really a few times, but it's worked very well when I have. So I'd say, well, we have we have met before. Do you remember? And they're like, no, we haven't met. No, we've met before. We met in Timpson's in the key cutting place. Do you remember? No. Yep, you should not remember, you were getting your key cut, your front door key cut. And then, and I said to you that we would meet again. You don't remember any of this, do you? No. Perfect. Okay. Show me your front door key. So they'd give me their front door key. I'd have a look at it, and then I'd throw it away. Ideally, I'd sort of maneuvered us near a manhole cover, or maybe it's off a bridge, or somehow I would throw their key away, by which point I normally switched it for a coin or something that looks quite realistic as it flies through the air or down the manhole cover, a little glint of metal. Anyway, so now you're in quite a nice position. And then I would say, it's okay. We've done this before. You gave me another copy of your key, and I said that we would meet here today. In fact, hang on, and I get my keys out, and I go through my keys and goes, think it's this one? No, it's this one. It's not exactly the same as yours. Yours had the little owl on the front. This one doesn't, but it's close enough. But that should open your front door. And I give them the key and leave them with it. And then they've got their whole walk home with this key, thinking, why does Derren Brown got my front door key on his key ring? And then the lovely moment when they're going to actually try it in their door and it's going to open their front door. It just seems to me that that's a really lovely way of doing magic, and just not making it about yourself in the moment, just giving them something to go away with. So that was one of two thoughts. The other thought, I'm going to go with that one because that just created such a lovely kind of creepy, weird thing. The other one I won't go into now, but it does in the book as well. But I thought it was a fun and sort of counterintuitive way of approaching the effect of a trick, and a use for I think a really good prop. And also, there's no ring to lose. I mean, we've all done that. We've all done the trick and heard the ting, ting, ting as this person's ring is, in my case, falling down a stairwell behind me. So yeah, no rings to lose either.
I wish I was a spectator in that moment, though. And I know that we don't often get moments like that ourselves nowadays. But I would love to be in that moment and to have that walk home and to think, what on earth has just happened? It sort of reminds me of, in your last show, you had the deck under box. And obviously, without giving too much away, it's available online. I think you can go and see it. So I don't want to give too many spoilers to that. But there's this...
that might be my number 5 trick.
Oh, well, then people will find out. I won't say anything more about that, but that has that same moment where it almost feels like, I mean, being in the theatre, the sad thing is that people won't necessarily be in the theatre when that happens. But for me, being in the theatre and hearing an onslaught of people around you genuinely start questioning life in general and what's going on to them, it's just amazing. So yeah, that moment would be incredible. It would be that moment where you walk back and go, are aliens real? What's happening here?
It's also one of, I mean, this key trick. It's also a rare example of where you get to have an argument with with your participant, because you've just thrown their key away and you're giving them another one and then leaving them. I mean, that's if they believe that that's really what's going on. That is an argument. They're not going to go, oh, great, oh, wow, I can't wait to go home. And, there will be an argument, which I think is, always fun.
That's a great choice. And that brings us to your halfway point. So what's in your 4th position?
Okay, so by this point, I'm thinking I've got to actually think about my career here, continuing, and what would be the sort of absolute stalwarts that I continue with. So I've chosen for this the Oracle Act, which was my Q&A act from, again, one of those shows, Evening of Wonders or Enigma, I think. Anyway, I also did it in on Broadway, so it's gone through a few versions, and I'm choosing it because I mean it's a sort of potentially can be a show in itself. In fact, I did a TED talk that was just the Oracle Act, or at least half of it. So although at the beginning, actually, it's an interesting thing with these shows, and that was 4 shows in that we did that. We often sit, and I say we, I mean me and Andrew O'Connor and Andy Nyman when we're writing the shows, or Stephen Long and Ian Sharkey on Svengali. But we're often thinking, what are the sort of classics of mentalism that I haven't done? And a thing often happens that I often find myself a little resistant at first. Like I didn't think a Q&A act was that interesting. It just felt a bit old-fashioned. I think probably maybe it's done more now, but certainly at the time it wasn't. And then you do it and you realize why it works and why it is such a mainstay of mentalism. I had the same experience with the psychometry routine in Showman. So which I wasn't sure which one to use actually for this, but I ended up going with the Oracle Act. But again, I wasn't sure about doing psychometry, because isn't that just returning things to people, their objects in bags, and it just again, and I kind of thought, well, maybe there's a more interesting version of it, but it just didn't feel at first glance that interesting. And then I just made it about the objects and the people, not really about whose object was who. In fact, sometimes I'd get that bit wrong, and it became, like, for me, the most gorgeous moment in that show to perform, and also became a sort of emotional way through to where the show was going at the end. That was important structurally, but it was just sort of, it's a very lovely thing to, as with both this and the Oracle, to not really know quite where you're going, that you've got certain things in place magically to sort of guarantee you this sort of, framework. And then after that, you just got to really sort of think on your feet. And it's all about really kind of creating a sort of a tone, and then just getting that tone right. And it's a really lovely experience. And there aren't many times in a show where you get to have that. And it's a bit like time stops, and if you're going out for dinner after the show or something, and it is tempting to think, in the middle of a more mechanical trick, it's very common to be thinking, oh, we're going out for a tie after this. Well, that'd be lovely. Your mind can start to do that. Whereas the lovely thing about something like the Oracle or whatever is that there's none of that. You're completely present with it. And on top of that, certainly when we did it on Broadway, it was sort of lit very beautifully. And I never get to see what the show looks like because I'm facing the wrong way. But by all accounts, it looked beautiful as well. So, I always do it in a white tie, and I've got bandages around my head as you try and create a strong visual image. But yeah, I think for that experience, that rewarding experience as a performer of having to be totally present with it, and also unavoidably feeling like you're stepping into a tradition that's had its heyday, I guess probably in the sort of 20s and 30s, but and for good reason. And also, like all the best things, from a magical point of view, is so simple, and there's sort of really nothing to it. And I remember a very, very seasoned and knowledgeable magician saying to me, I can kind of get my head around how you did it at the start when you were sort of doing it with people's questions that they'd written in envelopes, but then you stopped using the envelopes. And I just don't know how, it's lovely to know how, or just for something to have, it's like a big psychological story that everybody's getting caught up in because it's so kind of emotionally sort of appealing, and it's such a fun sort of ride that you kind of, hopefully you just sort of stop questioning too much in the audience, stop trying to work it out, and also realizing that it's all about the information that you're giving, and which again is something I've read, it's something I knew in theory, that no one really cares how you're doing it, it's what you're revealing. But that's really true. But that's an amazingly liberating thing, because then you can design you. And I make sure when I do that Q&A that I've got this control over the shape of the material I'm giving. I've got I can mold it in a way that it'll have an arc and so on. But you just get to play with what is the most extraordinary and sensational stuff, and sometimes you can just make that up, and that will just fly. I mean, those are the best moments of stuff you're just making up. So yeah, that's a wonderful thing, and I think that given that could be an act in itself, I would definitely have to keep that as one of my 8 tricks to continue with, and I still do it in my sort of corporate act on the rare occasions when I do that.
I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it's in Miracle. You have sort of a mini Q&A. I recall having people sort of sat into almost bleachers, and then I think that's where you lift someone up. I think that's where that ends. But you do like a mini Q&A. But I think you preface it by saying, this is all made up. None of this is real. This is all made up.
Yeah, so that was it. It was in Infamous, and it was, it came out of. It's interesting how sometimes the best things come out of mistakes and real limitations. So it was a real lesson. So we had 52 seats come out on stage. It was the end of Act 1, and the whole scene, the whole set transforms into a cathedral. There's a guy who's been put to sleep and is in this whole kind of sarcophagus thing, wheels on, and he's going to be asleep during the interval, and all these trucks, they're called, that the seats come out and there's smoke, and it was going to be for a giant card at any number trick in the second half, and then we took that out because there was a couple of card tricks which just felt a bit too much. So, but we were left with this big transformation scene and all these seats, so we couldn't not use them. So one afternoon, having ditched the card at any number trick, we're looking at 52 seats, going, what else could this be? And it struck me that it looked a bit like a studio audience set up in a studio, which always makes me think of those sort of dodgy mediums when they have their TV shows and they're doing stuff with an audience. So that became that. Because let's do some mediumship, and then it's, well, how do you make mediumship interesting? And I think it stayed with me, this, because I think theatrically it was interesting, because as you say, I'm saying this, I'm making this up, this is rubbish. So yeah, I've got your aunt here, her name is Jan, is that right, Auntie Jan? And they'd be like, yes, and she's not saying anything, of course, I'm lying to you, but she's saying blah blah blah, and it would go back and forth like that, and it just kind of occupied this interesting space. I think we get rather caught up, particularly as mentalists, between, are you saying it's real or it's not? Are you this or this? Like, it's a very binary thing. And I don't think ultimately your responsibility is to that particular ethical question. I think your responsibility is a theatrical one. And actually having this sort of other thing in the air, which isn't how is he doing it or is he real? It's just this sort of kind of, two ideas battling it out in your head. He's saying it's rubbish, but at the same time, he's saying stuff that's, impossibly accurate. That just felt like a really interesting sort of place to sit. And I remember really early on in the tour, I came out at stage door, and there was a girl there, and, bright girl, maybe like in her early 20s, and she said, I wonder if you could put me in touch with my grandmother who's passed away. And she'd just seen the show. And I said, oh, God. I said, I'm so sorry. I really hoped it's clear from the show that I can't really do any of that stuff. And she went, oh, yeah, no, I know you can't do any of that stuff, but I just wondered if you could put me in touch with her, which was such an interesting thing for someone to say, and said so much about how we are happy to sort of balance these completely contradictory narratives when it comes to this kind of stuff. What we emotionally want to believe and what we intellectually know can be so different. So yeah, that was interesting. And I think that the best stuff in any show, certainly as a performer, doesn't necessarily translate to the audience's experience, but is when you get to improvise and just have to really, really think on your feet. It's a treat if you're doing, 300 shows.
You mentioned that you still do it in your corporate. Do you still get to a stage where that same thing happens to you? So people come up to you and they want you to have talks with their dead relatives, etc., or has it died out completely now?
I find it's died out. I mean, I never do. I never do tricks on, I mean, I avoid chat shows and stuff anyway, but if I am ever a guest on something, I never perform. And that was a rule right from the very start, which is a bit surreal, really, as a rule, but that kind of served me well. And I think because I'm never doing that stuff in interviews, it sort of maybe doesn't occur to people that I'll just do that stuff at the drop of a hat. And yeah, people don't really ask. And if they do ask, it's normally like somebody being a bit rude anyway. Like it's just like, I'm having dinner here and they want me to, can you come to our table and love you to, but so rarely happens. And if it does, I said, if it's a bit rude anyway, I don't feel bad going, I'm sorry, I'm having dinner, whatever. Or we've met before in Timson's. However the mood takes me. So no, not too much nowadays. But yeah, there's sort of other strangenesses that come instead from being well known and from doing the sort of stuff that I do and from the way people respond to anything remotely hypnotic or the card trick that you mentioned in Showman, that really was very triggering for a lot of people. I mean, it's a card trick, but it upset a lot of people. So the stuff I have to deal with is that, rather than I'd love it if it was just, can you put me in touch with a dead relative? That would be relatively light.
Great. So that brings us over your halfway point. So so far we've had an ACAN, we've had the watch in sock. We've had I'm going to call it Key and River or the key trick.
The key trick, yeah.
Cool.
I like they didn't have names. It's quite nice not having names. It's a bit like I've never really kind of been very specific about what I do. And I like the fact none of my tricks really have names apart from smoke. So number 5.
Yes. So what's in your 5th position?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's no particular order to these, but this is where I've got the card to box trick from Showman. And I think the origin of this came from the brilliant, mysterious author of The Jerks, whom I love all of that. And he had a use for the invisible deck where I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was something like you convince the person that they've put the card, they've turned the card around themselves, and that you've made them forget it, that you've sort of hypnotized them. And I'd always loved Jay Sankey's trick. I don't know what it's called, but it's such a brilliant thing where you make somebody forget a card that they've just seen, and it's a mechanical card trick, but this one person seems to have forgotten it. Everyone else knows they were just looking at a totally different card. So I've always loved those ideas because it creates something bigger. It just creates a bigger question is in the air than just how you did that, or how you found the card, or whatever the normal questions often are for magic. So one of my mainstays when I used to do my hypnosis shows was that on a certain cue, people would get up and go and do something and come and sit back down again and have no memory of doing it. And it was always really fun watching somebody think through the fact that that their wallet was over the other side of the stage, or that someone else had it in the audience when they were just really holding on to it, because by this point, it's the 5th time it's happened. So they sat on their wallet, and then seemingly 3 seconds later, it's not there. So it felt like this could be a fun thing. So the trick, if people haven't seen it, is it's a 3-stage trick. And the first stage is somebody comes up out of the audience. I sit them down at the table. There's a strange moment where I do a sort of hypnotic induction thing, and then the microphone goes off, and they we don't hear this little bit of a conversation I have with them. And then I tell them that I'm going to do a card trick. They pick a card, and there's a box on the table, and I say, put your hand on the card, and we've all seen what it is. It's going to disappear from under your hand and appear in the box. And I say, it'll happen on the count of 3. And we go 1, 2, and then all the lights go out. And there's a long pause. And I say 3, the lights come back up, and the card's in the box. And it's just sort of funny, but seems more like a gag. And then I explained to them how it worked. And I said, it worked because you put it in the box. When you came and sat down, I put you to sleep, you won't remember. And I told you that you'd put it in the box yourself and you won't remember doing it. And they don't believe that. It just seems like a silly explanation. So we'll do it again, but this time we'll leave the lights up. And I take the box, put it on the floor this time, and we do it again. And sure enough, between 2 and 3, as I count from 3, the guy gets up, walks around, puts the card in the box and sits back down again and has no memory of doing it. And also we film it, and then I can play it back to him. So now he watches on the screen himself getting up and doing it. And then the third phase, which is the most satisfying, is doing the same trick on the audience. So this time we say, okay, we'll do it again, but this time we'll get somebody to guard the box. And there was a real issue with this trick, is keeping the logic of it right. So, and it sounds silly, but I mean, it was like, we all know how it's working in the audience. So why are we guarding the box? Why are we upping the stakes? So it was all about it was all for this person on stage. Well, if you think I'm just doing it with some sleight of hand, look, this time we'll get someone to guard the box. So someone's guarding the box, which is hanging from a rope. Someone's staring at that from the audience, not going to take their eyes off it. This time he's going to sign the card, and he's got his hand on that on the table. Count to 3, and then I say, before I count to the audience, this will work with some of you as well. And then I count 1, 2, and then there's a sort of like a glitch. The lights go out for a second, and 1, 2, is it 1, 2, 3 or 1, 3? Or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? God, I can't even remember. Somehow I've missed out numbers. Is it 1, 2, 5? It's 1, 2, 5, isn't it? I'm sure that's it. Yeah, sorry, it's counted to 5, not counted to 3, I think. Anyway, there's a glitch, and the number. I haven't counted all the numbers, whatever they are, and the card's gone from under his hand, and the chair I was sat on is over the other side of the stage. It's underneath where this box was hanging. The box is swinging, and sure enough, his signed card is in the box on the other side of the stage. But the audience had missed it too, and that's the moment that you were talking about earlier, which it was so interesting doing this for the first time, because what follows that moment is us walking over to the swinging box, it coming down, the person saying, no, I never took my eyes off it. They can't understand. The person guarding the box can't understand what's happened. And the person takes the box and opens it up and takes it out. And sure enough, it's their signed card inside. It's a really good card trick. And there was like a lot of thought that went into it. But no one's paying any attention at all, because the whole audience are just like, did you just miss that? They're all having this sort of, there's just this murmur and sort of a general hubbub and confusion. So I'm just carrying on, and night after night, I kind of got used to it. I'm carrying on with the trick, knowing that no one is listening or watching, to get to the end of this terrific card trick, which of course also owes a lot to Guy Hollingworth. Just to credit him where that's due. So that was such a joy to do, and part of it, it never not worked, and every night I was sort of like, I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. So there was a real tension for me in it, which made it really fun. And we had a sort of plan B and C that when I say we, I mean me, and also, but if I change anything, all the, lighting and sound, all that's got to change too. So as a team, we sort of had this like a backup plans, but never had to use them. It always just worked. Some nights better than others, in terms of how the person behaved, and they're sort of just how entertaining it was, I suppose. And sometimes people, when they're on stage, especially when there's something hypnotic in the air, they can they start to feel like they're playing along, which is so annoying. Or sometimes they do the opposite and they just go a bit sleepy, which is also kind of takes the edge off it. So it really varied as to what the trick felt like, but it always worked. And always had this sort of jeopardy to it, and always had this just gorgeous moment of just knowing that this sort of bomb was just about to sort of land in the audience, as it were, not an actual bomb. Was lovely. So I adored that. And then, of course, the kicker of the trick, which I'm forgetting, is at the very end of the show, the audience had then played the time that they'd missed, which is the footage of the person walking across the stage and putting the card in the box. The thing that they all missed, or most of them missed. I remember a really interesting thing of I was in Birmingham and I'd been to see a physio a couple of times there because I had some problem with my back or something. And as often when I'm at a physio, I end up talking a lot about having a whole discussion with them about, pain and the show Miracle, where I was doing the faith healing. And I ended up inviting this guy to come and see the show. And he came with his wife and he said, oh, you're probably, whatever you're going to do, you'll probably get me because I'm really suggestible. I'm always being hypnotized. My wife's not, though, but you'll probably get me. I thought, okay, well, maybe you'll end up on stage, whatever. Although I never get people up that I know, but that was that. And then he came and saw the show, and then he came out afterwards. I've got to get this right because it was really right. So he told me that he was very hypnotizable. Anyway, he comes around afterwards. So after this trick has finished the show, and he said it was really interesting. You didn't get me at all. Actually, it didn't fool me. The card trick didn't fool me, but it completely fooled my wife. We had a big argument about it. In fact, afterwards, I remember seeing the guy walk across. I totally saw him walk across, but she didn't. She fell for it. She forgot the 10 seconds. And it was a really interesting thing to kind of unravel that he was so suggestible that he had filled in the time for himself and convinced himself that it had happened. And of course, it hadn't worked for her in the same way. She'd just seen what, a non-suggestible person would see. But that had meant in his mind that she'd fallen for it. It was just a really kind of interesting, confusing moment for me in the dressing room afterwards. So yeah, that was a real delight. And then after that, I killed a fish.
Yes, you did towards the end. What was great, I mean, you're never going to have the experience of it, but from being in the audience, that effect actually had sort of like a two-parter in terms of the reactions, because I remember having one person to my left who it had worked sort of. So they were like, yeah, well, I don't know. I don't think it really happened. And then I had someone on my right, this lady who was just, my God, how's he done that? I'm not. This doesn't normally work on me. Just pure shock. And then the end of the show happens, so they get to see this part. And there was a moment where the guy on my left completely switched, and the whole ground beneath him just swallowed him up. And it's almost like he couldn't backtrack, but he couldn't also admit to himself that he'd been caught with it. Yeah. So he didn't know where to go with it. He didn't know how to digest it. He couldn't really talk. He couldn't compute what was going on at all. So it was lovely that if you didn't get them the first time, you were going to get them by the end of it.
Yes, I suppose that's a good point. It's like a pincer movement, isn't it? It's going to get you one way or the other. But it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was really surprising how upsetting that trick was for some people. So we started getting like angry letters about it. And like the first time someone was really upset about it, it's easy to kind of think, oh, well, it's just, someone that's upset about it. It's a bit odd, but I hope they're okay and can't do much about that. But then it became a bit of a, not a regular thing, but certainly enough to kind of really pay attention to the extent that I then had to change the trick and put in, don't take part in this. Close your eyes now if you suffer from any form of PTSD, or if you've if you, I can't even quite remember what the list of things was, but I think PTSD was the big one, or whatever passes for PTSD nowadays. Because I think the idea of first of all, suppressing a memory and being made to forget something is potentially a delicate one if you've had bad stuff happen to you that you have suppressed. And also it's quite a violating thing, just the idea that you could really get inside someone's head without their permission, which of course to me is just what I do, and I don't really think about it as anything that's going to be upsetting for people as an idea. But I think it all the things you're saying there, like that the ground can really fall out from beneath you, and how that can mean really different things to different people. So there we were with a card trick that was causing proper distress to some people, not just being angry, but like people shaking, in tears, sobbing, just really weird situations that kind of like came out of it. So that was fascinating, because I've often had moments like that when I've taught, particularly if there's anything sort of hypnotic in the show. But we didn't think that the card trick would be what would get people there the most. So yeah, you never know. And then of course you do have to change it. You have to be take those things seriously, and you want to find a way of changing it that doesn't soften the effect, in fact only adds to it. And then of course adding in a disclaimer: do not take. In fact, I would say leave the theatre now if you suffer from any of these things, including PTSD and others. Go step outside, and the ushers will bring you back in. And of course, all of that only adds to the electricity of the moment, but was a genuinely necessary thing to call for, because you don't want to just soften the effect and make it half as good because a small percentage of people are triggered by it. You want to respond to that responsibly, whilst also having a responsibility to the show and the rest of the audience. It was a tricky and interesting one, all of which is covered in Notes from a Fellow Traveller,
which I've got my little copy here.
You've got one in the background. I love it.
I do have it there. And there's your deck of cards as well, which was also very interesting. It was like a little virtual online hunt that we had to go through.
I met someone the other day who had won that. I never... so when we produced the deck of cards, Jonathan Baim, who I guess runs Theory 11, he suggested, well, let's put some kind of treasure hunt or something in. Sometimes we do these things. And so, I mean, you literally... I'll say it's all over now, so I don't think there's any problem with me saying it. If you bought the boxed edition, then in the box, there was a little card with something on it. But if you felt inside the envelope, do you know any of this? Have you done it?
Yeah, I've got the envelope up there as well. Yeah.
You felt inside the envelope, there was a message in Braille, and it was some numbers. Like who is going to do that? But clearly some people did. If you take those numbers as coordinates, I think you get to Todmorden, which is a town in the north of England that I did one of my shows in. So now you realize you must be onto something. There's a sort of a running thing, I think, in the packaging around this book, around the deck of cards, that it looks like a book, and I think there's a reference to a title. I can't remember what it is, but either way, if you Google, you're going to hopefully want to Google bookshops in Todmorden, and if you do, you get to one, and there's something on the front page of that is a sort of a clue that lets you know you're on the right track. I think probably whatever this other title is that has come up is right there on the front page. And then you're going to be looking through that site, and it's the crossword. There's a puzzle page on the website. And if you do the crossword, I think it's the one clue that doesn't work, that doesn't fit. And that word is the password. And if you type in that password somewhere, you win the prize. I mean, the thought that anybody would even feel around inside an empty envelope, let alone do all of that. And then I met someone the other day who came to see one of the previews of Unbelievable. And he had done all of that, and he was like, yeah, I just did that and felt the braille, and didn't think anything of it. Yeah, extraordinary. So there we are. If anybody else was trying, that's what you had to do.
My question for you, based on what you just said, I mean, I know in your book you reference the lady who was at the bar, and she sort of having an episode of some sort, and you try and get her out of it and talk her out of it. When you have the people, you mentioned that you also put the warning in. Number one, did the warning actually stop those things from happening? And number two, if they did happen, how did you get around those people being upset or angry?
It greatly reduced it. There were two things that I realized. I was having more issues with people responding strangely to the suggestion and hypnosis throughout. And there was sort of some suggestion-based routines in the first half, but very light, nothing that you'd think would be upsetting. And I don't think they were, but nonetheless, it was sort of creating this atmosphere of hypnosis in the room. And I realized after 20 years of doing it and having sometimes people react badly to it, but always being able to sort it out, I realized that all that was happening was they were having a panic attack. So people that were prone to panic attacks anyway, maybe they joined in with the suggestion routine with the audience and they'd close their eyes. And then at the end, I've said, wake up and open your eyes. And they haven't been able to open their eyes. And sometimes that does happen, like if you're doing it with a group of people. Sometimes someone takes a little longer to come out of it. But I think if you feel a bit lost in a crowd of a couple of thousand people, and it is taking you a little while to come out of it, and the show's carrying on, you might get it into your head of, oh, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. And again, that might not bother a large percentage of people, but I think if you're also a bit prone to panic attacks, and then that kicks in, then you've got this sort of self-perpetuating thing. So it's a panic attack plus you can't open your eyes and you think you're hypnotized, and that's what's created it, as opposed to I'm having a panic attack and I'm telling myself I can't open my eyes. So it was interesting, and I realized that that's what it was. So that was the other thing I remember saying, don't take part in this if you're at all prone to panic attacks, and if you have any issues with PTSD. And interestingly, I think it maybe happened once or twice after I put that in, but both times it was people that ignored the warning and took part, despite the fact that they did one or other of those things did affect them. And then as to how to deal with it, I mean, this is all stuff I talk about in the book, because I was writing notes from a fellow traveler during the day. So I was doing the show in the evening, and I wanted to write about performance, as well as like writing a show and putting it together, because not more people are doing that nowadays. And I'd sort of kind of written my book for Close Up many years ago, so I thought this would be a good thing to do. But because I was doing it during the day, I was including experiences often from the night before on stage, which is why it's quite a long book, because it was a long tour. So I thought I would include these things in the book because it was all part of the wider experience of doing the show. And there is no, and I wanted to sort of offer advice because there isn't really much around for people if they are using hypnosis or anything as to what to do. And I think the answer for me is always just to be present and patient and to just be with the person and slowly let them inch their way out of it, and to understand what their experience is well enough that you can. It's a very powerful thing when you can feed back to a person what you know they're experiencing and guide them to the next sort of stage, as opposed to thinking, oh, she just wants attention, she'll get out of it, get the bucket of water and things like that, which I've sort of heard done, which, I mean, maybe that stuff works sometimes, but to me it's just all a bit wrong. Every time it happens, I think the person's going to be angry and upset, and I'm going to get into terrible trouble for it and all the rest of it. And actually, very touchingly, it's always they're always very appreciative of the time. So in the book, I talk about a woman who gets her head stuck to the table in the bar in, I can't even remember where it was now, but Nottingham, I think. So in the interval, so there'd been some very light hypnotic stuff in the first half, and then I get a message in the interval saying this woman's got her head stuck to the bar. And I think by this point, people were starting to come back in for the second half. So I went up, and there she was, but she was furious and angry. Luckily, I say luckily, for me, I suppose she did look like she was drunk. So I don't think anybody was thinking that there was a problem other than maybe someone had too much to drink. But she wasn't, but she was oddly furious. As in like very kind of really vitriolic about it. And I ended up sort of having to just go back and do the second half of the show because she wouldn't let me help her. She wouldn't let me even begin to help her. And by this point, she'd come off the table and she was on the floor and she couldn't get up. And I remember sort of the end of the conversation was me saying, well, okay, I'm going to, if you don't want me to help you, I've got to go and carry on with the show now. And she's like, yeah, okay, well, you enjoy the second half of your show. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I will. And then I'm doing the rest of the show thinking, why did I get a bit chippy with it? At the end, plus I'm doing the second half of the show thinking, I'm talking to someone about their deceased relatives' sentimental objects. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, there's a woman stuck to the floor in the interval in the bar upstairs. So then I did go up afterwards, and by this point, St. John's ambulance had been called, and the area had been sort of cordoned off. And she'd got over the anger side of it. Now she was just upset, and I could spend time with her. And then it was very different. Then she was happy for me to talk to her, and then she came out of it, and everything was fine, other than the fact, she'd been asleep for a long time, so, in a bit of an awkward position, things like that. Again, you just need to be careful and present and just really to have that experience happen to you enough times that you know how to make somebody feel okay. And that afterwards, when it's done, that continues the work, having a hug and a bit of a laugh about it and buying them a drink and just those things that just create a story of what's happened, which is really all it is. It's somebody just succumbing to a story of what they think is going on, that you make that story feel right. But unfortunately, if people are, if their friends are panicking, or if call an ambulance, all that kind of stuff, that really doesn't help. That's going to make a person panic so much more. So there's quite a lot of that sort of management of things. Luckily, this doesn't happen very often. And she was said she was happy, and I got a really sweet card from her. And her husband is just sort of sat there watching the whole thing, not sure what to do, really sort of thanking me for my time afterwards, which always, surprises and touches me when, people say that, as opposed to, how dare you? So yeah, that wasn't the card trick. That was just making people forget the number 7, in the first half of the show. So you never know, and you do have to take this stuff seriously and be responsible about it, because you never know what people are bringing to the table.
It was such an amazing trick to see live, and it was just so wonderfully constructed, and it was a joy. Sadly, it's one of those things that you're not going to get the same reaction as being in the audience. But
no, well, we didn't know how to show it on TV, of course, that whole card to box thing, because it sort of dawned on us at some point, hang on, we're going to film this. What are you going to watch on TV? Like, there are so many layers of difficulty to that, because if it happens, if that person has crossed the stage and put the card in the box, you would see that at home. Or if you haven't, because you've been hypnotized in the moment and missed it, you certainly see it if you go back and watch it. So then why aren't you seeing it? And then really just in the end, it had to become about, this is something that happened to the people in the audience. This was what would happen to you if you'd have come and seen the show live. This was their experience, and not trying to make it an effect for people at home. So that was sort of ultimately what but we were going to, at one point, we were going to cut to me cooking at home. We were going to go 1, 2, and then it would cut to me making poached eggs and talking about the ideal way of poaching an egg. And then it would cut back to the stage, 5. And, we were playing around with all sorts of weird ways out of it. I think in the end, we just lingered on the audience and just sort of created this, here is an odd moment for the audience, which I think kind of sort of elegantly answered that without answering it.
Hello guys, I'm here to talk to you about Alakazam Unlimited. This is the best streaming platform in the world, I'm telling you now. With Alakazam Unlimited, you get access to over 150 magic routines. This is video performances and explanations. We have card magic, coin magic, kids magic, rope magic, mentalism, stage, parlor, impromptu. We've got you covered. All of this for the low price of just £4.99 a month. And you can cancel at any time. Perfect if you've got commitment issues. Yes, I'm talking to you. Guys, you are going to absolutely love it. If you haven't joined the platform already, what the heck are you doing? Alakazam Unlimited is a streaming platform that you need to be a part of. Not only that, there is also exclusive content only available on the platform. Check it out now, alakazam.co.uk. Cheers.